Pop quiz, hotshot. There's a bomb on a bus. Once the bus goes 50 miles an hour or more, the bomb is armed. If it drops below 50, it blows up. What do you do? What do you do?
Well, what we're going to do, Roger, is talk about Speed, the 1994 surprise hit in Hollywood and around the world. Directed by Jan de Bont and starring Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock, and many, many stars such as Dennis Hopper, Jeff Daniels, and joemorton, which is one of my favorites, kind of supporting actor.
Yeah, and of course we've been making references to Speed all the way through this podcast, supersonic, 50 miles an hour and all that sort of thing. And again, it's genuinely one of those films where, again, you're on the edge of your seat pretty much all the way through the film. I think once it gets started, and it gets started pretty quickly, within the first 5 minutes, you're right into the action. It never really stops for 1 minute to let you catch your breath. So it lives up to its name immediately with that whole Speed idea.
And you know what is interesting is that it's a film that feels, looks and sounds like the 90s, and it is to be watched therefore with that nostalgia in mind. You and I sometimes ask ourselves the question, how would it work with a younger audience, because of course they've been used to something more current and modern. But I have to say, as part of this podcast, I was reminiscing about Speed. I went to sit at the movies and I was blown away by the storyline and the action. And I had the VHS cassette with me for years, and I watched it at least once or twice a year. It was kind of the guilty pleasure, but also it's just a good film, and the acting is excellent, the tension, and it's very believable as well. And I think that the filmmakers did a very good job.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I mean, it's simple premise. There's a bomb on this bus, and if the bus goes lower than 50 miles an hour, it's going to explode. And that's a simple concept to get your head round. But then on top of that, you've got to layer on the fact that it takes place in Los Angeles and all the traffic congestion that you have in Los Angeles. So the possibility of keeping a bus going above 50 miles an hour with all that traffic, that's what made it scary, because, oh my God, there's a traffic jam up ahead. We've got to dive off the freeway. And then they dive off the freeway and they find that there's a lorry in the way and they've got to scream round a corner. And it's just those, it's a simple idea, but they keep putting these hurdles in front of these poor people. And as I say, it almost becomes quite scary and quite tiring to watch it, because it's like one thing after another.
And people say that, of course, when you watch it with a 2020 kind of audience mindset, it can be quite lame as a storyline and action. But even when you look at the body count, I mean, this is a violent film, in terms of action. So the bad guy, Dennis Hopper, who plays the role of Howard Payne, you very kindly read his kind of line, and I think for years afterwards, people kept going on pop quiz hot shot around the office and,
yes.
and with their mates around the pub. But I think the villain is menacing. He's kind of obviously lost the plot completely. But also it was just that relationship between Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, who plays obviously Annie, and he plays which I think is a wonderful 90s hero's name, Jack Traven. I mean, if you call Jack Traven, you will do well in a film like Speed.
Absolutely. It's like Baz Ingram, isn't it? It's a fabulous name. And, the pop quiz hotshot thing, I don't think this film is flawless. And actually, I'm always a big fan of setting things up in films and making things that happen early on in the film relevant to things that happen later. But I did think, at the very part of the first start of the film, the baddie Dennis Hopper actually puts a bomb in an elevator. That's the first introductory scene, and you've got Keanu Reeves and Jeff Daniels arriving in this tower block to try and get the people out of the elevator, and all of a sudden Jeff Daniels just suddenly goes into this pop quiz hotshot. You're in an airport and you've got a hostage. What do you do? What do you do? And Jack Traven says, "Oh, I would shoot the hostage." And I thought, oh, that's a very interesting conversation that they're having. Where did that come from? And literally, 10 minutes later, as Dennis Hopper's trying to get out the building, he manages to take Jeff Daniels hostage and he's backing away. And Keanu Reeves is there, and Jeff Daniels just goes, shoot the hostage. And of course, that's how they get out of it. And I just thought, that setup just felt to me to be a little bit clunky. Maybe set it up and then the payoff is an hour and a half later at the end of the movie, but a setup and then a payoff within about 5 minutes did feel a little bit like bad scripting to me. But hey, the rest of the film's fantastic.
And, I remember when I went on the screenwriting course, I was told by the tutor, be horrible to your characters. And my God, that film has really gone through the same school or lesson, because you're right, once the character Jack Traven is on board of the bus, interestingly, the bus number 2025, which you add the numbers together makes 50, there's just relentless obstacles and kind of false attempts and whatever. And I think some people may not have seen the film, so we're not going to let the ending, we're not going to reveal the ending in this podcast. But I think what is interesting is that, and that some people will come on to in a moment, is that when you watch it for the first time, you just don't know how they're going to get out of this one. You kind of have a sense of course, they're going to win, he's going to get the girl at the end, they're going to kiss. But in terms of how they're going to do it, even when they have an attempt and they have a solution that seems plausible, there's something that happens. There's like debris on the road that makes the bus veer a course. There's obviously red herrings and false information sent by Dennis Hopper's character, which means that the SWAT teams is going to wild goose chase and so on. And in the space of 2 hours, they packed so much. I mean, I think you're right. Apart from when they celebrate, obviously, the fact that Jeff Daniels escaped alive, albeit being shot in the leg, and they are at the bar celebrating, and the character played by Joe Morton warns Keanu Reeves that this was luck. Be more careful next time. Everything else is just full-on action and explosions.
Absolutely. And because this, again, coincidentally, this podcast episode has had a lot of references to aircraft and things like that. But don't forget that the very final part of the bus segment of the film actually takes place at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. They solve the problem of traffic congestion by actually taking the bus and driving around the runways at LAX. They use the location phenomenally well with this film. And you're absolutely right, relentless from start to finish. So what marketing lessons are we learning from Speed?
I've been thinking about this a lot. To begin with, this was 1994. Remember, only 3 years after people could get QuickTime to watch color videos, we mentioned a moment ago. So I think the marketing was very traditional in terms of what they did. The 20th Century Fox, who were the producers and distributors, wanted to keep it safe and do the Die Hard type marketing, which I think wasn't very wise. I mean, many years had passed from Die Hard, but they just didn't know what to make of it. So in terms of marketing lessons for all of us and content creators, one thing that Speed does very well, and obviously we must credit Jan de Bont and his cinematographer, is the use of color. The movie Speed has a strong color identity, which is the use of blue and red. And if you're interested, all of you, go back and watch Speed. You're going to have a blast, but also look for the blues and the reds, which is why, oddly, the poster is out of step. Because the poster has reds and oranges to sell the explosion, but actually the identity and the branding of the movie are blue and red throughout. And I think that's a good lesson for all of us to begin with, Roger.
Yeah, and Pascal, I'm going to have to go back and watch this film again. Now, I have to admit that because we get so excited about the films that we talk about on this show, I pretty much always go and watch the film again after we've recorded this episode, unless it's a film which I haven't seen for a while and I have to watch it before. But mainly I'll just watch it again because we get so excited. But I've never noticed that colour thing before about this film, so I'll be definitely looking out for it next time. And I guess the second lesson is just getting the best team possible to work on it. Joss Whedon wrote the dialogue, the original screenplay by Graham Yost. He also wrote Broken Arrow, Band of Brothers.
That film. Yeah,
Broken Arrow is a good one. And John Wright, who's the editor, 13th Warrior, Apocalypto, and Mark Mancina. Sorry, I pronounced that badly, but Con Air, Bad Boys, Training Day, all, heavily action film orientated. So get
Yeah,
that
and in
best
fact,
team behind you.
if you watch Speed again, now, having watched, the one you mentioned, like Bad Boys in particular and Con Air, you hear it's a bit like John Williams and Hans Zimmer and all the others. There's a signature, and when you watch Speed, you hear the undertone of Bad Boys in the film, which is kind of. But you're right, it's about the team. So as a content creator, know your place, know your strength. Now, interestingly, Jan de Bont really started his career as a cinematographer. Indeed, he worked with John McTiernan on Die Hard, that was
Yes.
reviewed by you and I recently. He also worked on Black Rain. He worked on The Hunt for Red October. But when he took on the role of director, he didn't also do the cinematography. He got Andrei Bartoviak to do that for him.
Yeah.
And I think that's also an important, when you become the project manager, so to speak, or the content director, don't try and double up on or step back into your comfort zone. Let others do what you would normally do because you have different duties on this occasion.
Yeah. And what was remarkable, again, we've said, is the actual basis of the story was really quite simple, wasn't it? That it's a bus, and if it goes below 50 miles an hour, it'll blow up. And yet, despite the simplicity of the premise, they constantly threw all these obstacles at the cast. And in a way, it was almost like even though it's a movie, it could almost have been one of those very old 1930s cliffhanger serials, couldn't it? Because literally, like every 5 to 10 minutes, you get a cliffhanger or another obstacle or another problem to solve. And then once you think, oh, thank goodness we've solved that, then there's another cliffhanger. Now imagine chunking it up into a series of 15-minute episodes. You could just see it working like that.
Well, I think I never thought of that, but you're right. And I can't really imagine, what, when they sat down, as they always do, to do the first reading with the directors and producers, and you're the actors, and you turn on the page, and you don't know what's coming next, and you must have thought, this is incredible. And we know that Keanu Reeves was so excited, particularly once he saw the second revision, when Joss Whedon, as you mentioned, got involved. The dialogues were much improved, but he thought, I'm going to do as much of the action as possible, and I think that also pays off, because we see a lot of him do the action, and he got himself in real shape for that. And that was maybe why he led to him doing John Wick and all the others, because he just got hooked on doing the action scenes as well.
Yeah, now we don't normally do this, Pascal, in this section, but let's just talk very briefly about the sequel to Speed, which came out a few years later. It didn't have Keanu Reeves in it. I think Sandra Bullock was the only person who managed to come across. But it was Speed 2, and yet they managed to set it on a boat. Now, however fast a boat can be, you just cannot convey the same aggression and the same genuine speed as you can with a land-based vehicle. And I always remember, I actually think that's one of the few films that I've bailed on and not watched the ending, because it was just like the antithesis of Speed. What would that be? Sloth? It was just utterly dreadful, and they should never have even bothered to try and make it.
No, it was so disappointing. I think all of us, because we're inspired, encouraged by, how exciting the first one was, we went there. But I think by then we've learned, nowadays, 30 years later, we've learned that when the lead characters are not in the main story, it's not worth going. It's just the studios trying to, essentially jump on the bandwagon. It was very, very poor. Because to that point, Speed is the one that people talk about all the time. I mean, last year, of course, was the 25th anniversary of Speed, and the media around the world, obviously the Blu-ray box set was released and so on and so forth. I don't think Speed 2 will have the same treatment. I thought I would close this discussion on Speed, which could last much longer, as is always the case with film marketing, with a comment made by the Hollywood Reporter when the movie was released. So the journalist at the time had seen the movie, and it's something that I think is very, very telling. So it said, there should be traffic jams at the box office as Fox picks up many busloads of riders for its fast and furiously entertaining thriller Speed. Fast and furiously entertaining thriller Speed. Could we suggest that Speed in 1994 planted the seed for the Fast and Furious franchise, or are we stretching it a bit?
You never know. You never know. I actually think there might be some truth in what you're saying there. Somebody watched Speed, and a whole new franchise was born out of that experience.
So, this is the end of episode 21 of Two Geeks and Marketing Podcast. Thank you so much for your support. Please leave comments, feedback, and suggestions in the usual places. Until the next one, make sure that your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni, and he was Roger Edwards. This was Two Geeks and the Marketing Podcast. We've got to go.